welcome to April meeting of the Berwick Historical Society. We're fortunate to have tonight some people from South Berwick, which is a sister town of Berwick, I would imagine. They broke off from us, as did North Berwick, so we have two sister towns already. And by the same token, we're all probably a sister town of Kittery, from which we derive. So tonight, the question is, who is your sister? And the town of South Berwick has put together a program with another city, another town, that's kind of unique because it's in the United States. It's not in a foreign country. So with us tonight, Karen Iger from the South Berwick Library, Dave McDermott, Scott McFedrin, Julia Willett, and Ernie Wood. Ernie Wood and Scott McFedrin.
Now you got it.
Yeah. So without too much further ado, I'd like to introduce Karen, and she'll kick off how the town got involved in this, what they've done. They're going to tell us about what's happening and what has happened and what they expect in the future. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Oh, nice to see you here today. And we have all been talking nonstop about our Tuskegee project ever since we went down and visited Alabama last December. We thought tonight what we'd do is tell you the story of how this all got started from the beginning to up to now. And years ago, when we were sort of finishing up the South Berwick Library building project, moving in, I was starting to turn my thoughts to programming, and sat down with some interested people to see what kinds of programs we were interested in starting in the new library. We wanted some fresh things, and what was happening in the news at that time was the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, and it was something that was calling out to myself and another person interested in helping with programs. We didn't know how we could be part of the national conversation about race relations when we lived in a place that had so few people of color. That, you know, in South Berwick, it was rare for me ever to see a black person, let alone know a black person enough to have a conversation. And I just felt like there was some compelling need to find a way to be part of what was happening in our country at that time. And I'd been mulling over my feelings about race relations since Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida, and I was shocked by the non-guilty verdict of George Zimmerman. I was flabbergasted that in the United States somebody could legally kill someone based on their race, and didn't know how to reconcile that with what I thought this country was about. And all of that led me to speak with Michael Hasty about doing some kind of race programming. And we had no idea how to do that. We didn't know if a bunch of white people had the credibility to do something like that without knowing anything much about Black America, given where we lived and our backgrounds. And we thought we needed more people. So we sort of I'm not even sure how, I know one person we invited to our committee, she was raising a black child. And we thought, well, she might be interested. We'll ask her. And she's not here tonight, Amy Miller. And I don't know how we landed on you. But we thought, we'll ask this guy. And he joined in. And so at that point, we had a little group. And we started talking. And we did not know what we were doing whatsoever. But we kept meeting and kept talking and started formulating a question, which is, why are we talking about, why would we talk about race in South Berwick? You don't have to talk about race when you live in a predominantly white place. But we felt like it was time to start learning something. We thought we should widen our circle a little more, so we sent a letter out to the churches, and Scott McFedrin answered the call and came in. He's the pastor of our First Baptist Church. And so that was 5 of us, and we kept talking and talking some more, and we invited Carmen Buford Page, who's a professor and a dean at UNH, a black woman who is used to helping people work through these kinds of processes, and she agreed to join our group and help us get our first program off the ground. And so we held that first program, Why Talk About Race in South Berwick. We had a pretty good turnout. The conversation was all over the place because people don't know how to talk about it. And that program showed the interest we have, but showed how inept we were at doing it. So we thought, well, okay, we'll do another program. How do we talk to our children about race? And we had the same kind of thing. A lot of people interested, a conversation that went everywhere, and I was always left feeling like, well, this is confusing, but it feels like there's some interest. So, do you remember the next one? What was next?
The last one we did was how to talk to children about race.
There was a middle one.
That was we had
A panel. We had a panel.
We also had the folks from
Right, Burying Ground.
the Berwick.
Yeah, we invited the, have you had the Valerie Cunningham come and talk about the African Burying Ground? Oh, it's wonderful. She's wonderful. So that was a great program. That got a big crowd because we drew in people who were interested in local history. And it was, that was transformative, I would say, because hearing someone tell about our local history and a graveyard that was in Portsmouth downtown, 3 blocks. It was 3 blocks of graves. And all of a sudden in my head, when I think about colonial Portsmouth now, the streets look different because there's black people in them, in my head. That had never happened before. So each time we did one of these programs, it seemed like things opened up differently in how I was seeing the world. And I can only speak for myself, my experience with these programs, but it has sent me to the bookshelves to read more of our American history and correct my misunderstandings and the history I was taught that was incorrect. And we still, as we were having our programs, we had a panel discussion about race. We brought in some people that we thought could help us answer some questions and give their perspectives on the current problems we were having. We just pulled out of the Maine news some incidents that had happened in Maine. I believe one was someone shouted the N-word at a 5-year-old walking down the street in Portland, and there were some incidents at one of the universities, Colby, I think. So we talked about those in that discussion. Each time we've had a program, it's just woken up my interest in learning and expanded my view of things. So at this point, we're still not really understanding how to have the conversations and not having the conversations with the people we wanted to have them with. And I'm going to turn over the next explanation to David. And, oops, don't go with that. Okay.
How's this work?
You don't
Clip it
have
on
to,
somewhere.
do much.
Don't have to do much. That's
And-
good.
And maybe when we get to you, I'll return the slides on.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Because the slides are some of our experiences down in Tuskegee. Well, just a little. So how did I get involved? I'll just tell you, go back to that because
I can't remember.
can't remember. Personal history, I grew up in Chicago, very racist neighborhood. I ended up going at some point in my college career to the only integrated school in the state of Mississippi at the time in 1968-69 during the height of the civil rights movement, an all-black college. And so that was quite an awakening for me. And 50 years later, this seemed full circle. So they weren't going to get away with doing this without me being part of it. That's how I got involved. Yeah, I think one of the common themes that came up in all of our meetings was a lot of people said they're afraid to even talk about race, you know, because they're afraid to say the wrong thing, or they'll be branded something, or they'll insult somebody. And so there's just this uneasiness about even dealing with the whole issue of race. And about that time, I remember President Obama was dedicating the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., and one of his lines was that we needed to start seeing each other and talking to each other and listening to each other. And that sort of resonated with me in a lot of ways, because we live in a very segregated country. I mean, even if you grew up in a city and you see black faces on the sidewalk, it's still segregated. They're not the people you hang out with. They're not the people you talk to for the most part. So we live in a very segregated country. And how are we ever going to bridge the gaps if we continue to be segregated? So one day I'm sitting at home and Amy Miller calls up and says, why don't we do a sister city project with a black community? I said, okay. So we started meeting, and Michael was part of that. He's no longer with our group right now, and Scott joined, and Karen was busy. She was off to the side, but she was always there. And so we thought, well, this is a good idea. Now we got to find a black community. And we went through the U.S. Census, and we tried to find a community that was somewhat similar in size to South Berwick, that was kind of family-oriented and community-oriented, like we think we are in South Berwick. And we came across Tuskegee, Alabama. And it sounded absolutely wonderful to us. If you go onto their webpage, it's a vibrant little community, or at least that's how it appears on their webpage. And they're 95% black, and we're 97% black, so the proportion's about the same. They're about 12,000. And we thought, well, this might be a good match. So we wrote some letters. Now, some of us are thinking, well, you know, and I'm a little bit of maybe a cynic, I don't know, but maybe it's, you know, we know what we want to have happen here. We want to have our kids not have to learn about race the way we did, you know, to have a more of a real experience with people of color, because it's the only way. If you have to grow up and you don't get smart till you're 70, you know, that's it's not helping. So we wanted our kids to have a different experience, but some of us, at least me, was thinking, well, black people probably think they know all they need to know about white people. Okay, you know, they've had a lot of experiences with white people, but we forged ahead. We wrote these letters to principals and the mayor's office, and we didn't hear anything back. And we made some phone calls, you know, and we didn't get any kind of a real response. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'll get back to you. And we never heard from anybody. And we were getting pretty discouraged, I think. I was getting pretty discouraged. And we had started expanding the group and other people in the community. We now have a steering committee of 13 people and lots more that would like to participate. Amy, who's a former journalist, she contacted the editor of the newspaper down there, and they were having a turnover in government. They have a council form of government like we do, but they have a mayor, and they're having a turnover with the mayor's office. And he went and put some pressure on the mayor and the council. One night, I get a phone call from the mayor of Tuskegee saying that they just had a council meeting, and the council was very enthusiastic about the Sister City project. And then, so now we had something real. And I have to tell you, it's been slow developing. And last December, you know, we wanted to get some projects going, school projects, church projects, historic projects, anything we could get going. We decided that we needed to kickstart it a little bit, so we said we were going to send a delegation down there. So 9 of us went down to Tuskegee, and we didn't know what the reception would be. We didn't know how this was going to work out. And I have other people here who will speak to it, but it was just really a wonderful experience. They kept us very busy. They showed us their community. Tuskegee, if you don't know about Tuskegee, is a great historic community. Most of you might have heard of the Tuskegee Airmen from the Second World War. They were the first African-American fighter group, or pilots ever actually, that fought in the war. And they were famed, they're called the Red Tails. They were famed because they were really escorted the bomber pilots very closely, and they had a reputation. They did lose some planes, but they're a famous air group. And you just Google Tuskegee Airmen, and you'll learn a lot about them. There's the son of a Tuskegee Airman is in Kittery, and he came and did a little presentation at Marshwood High School for about 100 people. So that was really nice. They have Tuskegee University, which used to be Tuskegee Institute, with, if you know any black history, George Washington Carver, who was a really pretty famous worldwide scientist back in the late 1800s. He pushed the peanut, and he's credited with saving southern agriculture because they totally destroyed the soil, and he was the one that knew that if you put the nitrates back with the beans and the peanuts and so forth, that you could rejuvenate the soil. Why am I blanking on? Booker T. Washington, which most of you have heard of. He was the president of Tuskegee University. On a bad note, it was also the site of the infamous public health, U.S. public health syphilis experiment, where they, up until, believe it or not, 1972, they were infecting, or they were getting African-American men infected with syphilis, and then they refused to treat them. They were testing what happened when you treat it, when you didn't. So, you know, there's, and Rosa Parks, famous civil rights person. So they have a tremendous amount of history. So we went down there and they exposed us to the history. We had what they called a deliberate dialogue with a group of black people. And it was really neat to be able to have white people and black people actually talk about race in the same room. And you know, I'm going to turn it over to some other people to talk about their experiences. I just want to say that from my perspective, we left Tuskegee with not just an exchange, but actual friends and trust. And I think trust is the key to this whole thing. And I'm going to let other people talk about it. Thank you.
Oh, I can tell you all about our trip. It's kind of interesting. We kind of invited ourselves down and said, we're coming. And so we had no idea when we got on the plane what they were going to do with us or what we wanted to do with them either. We wanted to have some dialogue and we wanted to get to know them. So we really had no idea. So we got up at, what, 3 o'clock in the morning, got on the plane so we could be down there. We got down there at noon. We had rented a car and drove down to Atlanta. Drove 3 hours to get to Tuskegee and got to a motel. There are no motels in Tuskegee, so we were in the little town outside of Tuskegee, about half an hour away. And put our bags down, and there we were. We didn't know what to do, what was going to happen. So Karen and I decided we're going to go out and go for a walk. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We had been up half the night and all morning, and so we were exhausted. So we walked out the driveway of the motel, and this car comes by, and, "Hi, how are you? You must be from South Berwick." And it was the mayor and his assistant, Colorful, which we knew the name of, and we actually knew what the mayor looked like because they had sent us some little videos welcoming us before we even got there. And so that was the mayor and his assistant, and they brought us sandwiches because we hadn't had lunch, and it was just so welcoming. So we sat and chatted for a while, and then they said, well, at 6 o'clock we want to be over at Tuskegee University because the Golden Voices are putting on their Christmas concert. And this must be a really big event for the area because they were all dressed up. I mean, lots of glitter. And here we are. And anyway, they took us over to the university, and we met some people over there. And then we went and heard this Golden Voices choir, and it was absolutely beautiful. In this beautiful cathedral-like brick building. It's in the middle of the campus. So, and it was lovely. We met a lot of, they kept introducing us to all these people. The mayor's sister, and there was an artist there, and the former mayor, and all these people. And so the choir was over about 10 o'clock, and they said, well, now we're going back to some a room, and we're going to have the Community Development Corporation show you some of the small businesses that are in town. Well, this is 10 o'clock at night, and they're an hour behind us, so it's actually 11 o'clock for us, and they have the next program planned. So we were there for a couple hours, and they showed us, they have a young man who is bottling some water from a spring on his family property, and so he had that, and there was a vineyard there. There was also a blueberry patch, and they had blueberry jelly there. And anyway, so we met all those people, and we chatted with them and saw their things. So we got back to the motel about 1 o'clock that night. But we had to be at the schools at 8 o'clock in the morning. They had us. So, and we were. So our big push, we thought at this point, was to get the schools involved, our schools and their schools. And there were four or five school teachers and administrators that were involved in our school district that went down with us. So 8 o'clock the next morning, we went to the administration building, and Dr. Jacqueline Brooks, she was there. She's all dressed up in this beautiful white pantsuit, and we're sitting there, and they were so welcoming. They had a wonderful breakfast for us, and then they had a whole program for us. And we went to visit a grade school and a middle school, and saw some projects going on there, and got to talk to the principals at these schools. And one of the things that we were very impressed with was that they had bid on a grant from the Apple Corporation, and they had $1 million grant given to them with all these computers and training, as well as running these programs. And so they had a lab set up, and this was for the grade school. And it was a wonderful program. We were very impressed. And they had done some community outreach and got some money, so they made a new playground, all the playground equipment, and they were very proud of this. They're proud of themselves and everything. And if you walk, oh, that was the other thing. Walking down the hall of this school was a picture of each teacher and a quote from each teacher. And it was very uplifting and very empowering to these students. And so we were very impressed with that. So we had breakfast and lunch, and afterwards we went to, they have a building that has a adult education on technology and things like that. So, which was brand new. It's only been going, I think, for about a year, and they showed us all around that. And they have a nursing department and a mechanic department and an electronic department, and beautifully set out and very clean and organized. And so they're reaching out and they're really reaching out to their young people in their community, and that of course is what touches South Berwick's heart. We're very involved with our schools also. So we had lunch and the training session, and then we went back to Tuskegee University, where we had a conversation from the bioethics department of Tuskegee University. This department was funded and set up when President Clinton apologized for the syphilis experiments that were done on the men in Tuskegee. There was also an amount of money that put together, and they developed a bioethics department at Tuskegee University. And so we sat around a table. There were the 9 of us, and there were about 9 or 10 of them. And we got to talking about bioethics and how this would ever happen. Why would we do experiments on a black population and not tell them what we were doing? What's ethical about that? And so we had some interesting conversations about what is ethics, and then what are just the conversation between the black and white. And that was the beginning of some serious conversation that we did have. And it really opened up our eyes to white privilege and things that were going on. We learned so much about that. Then we went to, then they took us to a restaurant finally for dinner. And they're so welcoming and warm, and we went to 2 restaurants for meals, and as we're sitting there, people would come in, 1 or 2 people would come in, and the mayor and Collifull, his assistant, were always with us, and they would introduce, well, this person runs this program, that person, and most of them have their doctorates, their PhDs, and that person runs that program, and they would introduce them and tell us all about what they were doing in their community. So we met a wide variety of people, and it was very interesting. They also, the other thing we noticed, that at the restaurants and in the schools, I told you about the pictures in the schools of the teachers. Well, in all the restaurants, they have the pictures of their heroes. They're trying to lift up their population and feel like they have heroes like Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver and Rosa Parks, and some of the heroes that we don't know about because they're only in their area, but they are very important. So, and they are very proud of their heroes. They told us a lot about that. And then at 7 o'clock that night, we had another dialogue. So this was a long day, again. And this was called the Black Deliberative Dialogue. And it was a woman who led us in dialogue between a black population and a white population. And there were some college-age students there. And so this was our second dialogue. So we were becoming a little bit more friendly, and we were also exhausted, so we were a little bit more freer and talking and a little bit more open, as they were. And it was a wonderful conversation. And indeed, one of the things that kind of shocked us was one woman said, you know, I'm really angry. I am really angry at the history that's gone on and what you've done to my people, my black people. And so we thought we had to think about that, and we had to sit there and listen, and I think that's what the most important thing was we could do at that point. So we sat and listened. So that was one day. Then the next day we went to the Tuskegee Airmen Museum, which is wonderful. I think you talked about the Tuskegee Airmen. It's a wonderful museum, and just so happened there was a young man standing at the information desk when we got there, and his last name was Washington. Turns out he's the great-grandson of Booker T. Washington. So these are really people. Their families are still there, and so we got to chat with him for a few minutes. Again, we had lunch, and more people would stop in that were involved in their schools and their programs that they have in the community, and we met a lot more people, and then more of the hero pictures on the walls. And that afternoon we went to the Multicultural Center and a museum. It's a museum that traces the history of the area from prehistoric time up to current time. And it's fascinating to see the change in the land as well as the people through all these times. And a large part of that was some video on the syphilis project. This is very real to them. I knew about it. I'm a nurse, so I had known about it, but it never really impacted me. But it's so real and current to them today that we had to stop and think about that. Later afternoon, we walked around their town square, and they have a lovely town square. It's a bit run down. I kept saying I just wanted to get some paint and paint everything white because they have some beautiful buildings, some really beautiful buildings around a big, wide square with a lawn in the center and a gazebo, and of course the Confederate soldier statue in the middle of this square. So we had some talks about that. Why this statue? Because the city is mostly black at this point. It was not always that way. Probably in the 40s and 50s, it was a lot of white community. It was all white community at that point. And the black people started boycotting the businesses, so the businesses shut down, and all the white people left. And as we were walking around this square, looking at some of the buildings and the shops, Colorful and some of the other people were saying, you know, 20, 30 years ago, I could not have walked around this square with you. And that really brought it home to some of us. We thought, why in the world? I couldn't imagine that they wouldn't have been able to do that. And they told us some of the horror stories of the things that were done to keep the blacks out of the public swimming pool and those kinds of things. So they're still living in that reality. We had dinner at the Presbyterian Church, and we learned a little bit about almost everybody is involved in their church and their faith walk, and it's all about service. They have a lot of sororities they talked about at the church, and it's all about service to the community. And so they're really involved in growing their community and lifting it up. We also went to the Southern Christian Leadership Foundation, which is a lovely set of offices. It was all decked out for Christmas, and they were having a party there. And at this place, they support young women who are pregnant and having their first child. And they teach them and support them and help them learn and encourage them to raise their child and how they can do that. And they also try and include the fathers of the babies in this. And they have just a wonderful program. I can tell you all about it later, but I won't go into it at this point. We were very impressed with that. And I think Bernice, who was running that, I think she's coming up to Maine in a few weeks. So we're excited about that. Of course, and then Tuesday night, the utility board in Tuskegee had a meeting, and this is one of their formal government meetings. And we were asked to say a little bit about why we were there and what we were doing. And they were very welcoming, and everywhere we went, all these different places, they all had gift bags for us. It was just amazing to us. And this was a farewell party. We were at we were in the mayor's office after the meeting. They had a cake for us, and they were just very welcoming and warm. Wednesday morning, some of us wanted to go back to the university gift shop and the bookstore just to pick up some things. And the mayor insisted on, we were up like 1 o'clock again on Tuesday night, and he insisted on coming at 8:30 down to the bookstore to send us off, and he did. And one of the things that struck me, he was a very warm, welcoming person to everyone. While we were there, we wanted a picture of us in front of the bookstore with the mayor, and a student happened to walk by, a college student. So we asked him if he would take our picture. And as soon as the picture was over, the mayor walked forward and said, "What's your name? How are you? What are you doing here? How's your school going?" He really wanted to know what that individual student was doing there. So that's how they're supporting each other and lifting each other up. We were just very impressed with that. And we were telling the mayor how impressed we were. And what touched us a lot also was that, you know, the mayor said, you know, we've had a wonderful time too, and we are very excited to come up to South Berwick, and thank you for coming down here. So that was very warm and touching to us. Who wants to go next? Scott?
I'm not sure what's left to be said, but we'll make something up.
Oh, there's a picture the student took at
Yes.
TUSKEGEE University. That was our crowd, and that's the mayor in the center. We gave him a South Berwick t-shirt.
My name is Scott McFedrin. I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church over in South Berwick. And one of the reasons I got involved was just to examine kind of the faith piece of this whole thing. And really that wasn't my primary objective of being there, but realizing that I'm a part of a denomination that has a lot of resources and has a lot of experience over the years of being involved in some of the racial issues. Very briefly, the American Baptists and the Southern Baptists are two of the major Baptist denominations that split years and years ago over the whole issue of slavery. And so we, you know, that's part of it. It's part of our heritage, part of our history and background that we can talk about and we can share with others. But being involved with this, first of all, my heritage goes back to, I was born and raised in the suburban Detroit area. And from the beginning of our conversations together, I always thought to myself to be pretty well balanced on racial issues and not really a racial person or anything like that, but very quickly began to understand some of the ideas that we've been talking about and self-examination, this whole white privilege thing and some of the other things that we've talked about. And so I've been growing from that as well. But some of the things that stood out from our trip to Tuskegee, first of all, I wasn't there for the first night. Two of us had to come down on Monday morning, and so by Monday night we were drained, and you know, we get into this big deliberative dialogue thing, serious time together, and late in the evening, and you know, it was just kind of my hope to be able to balance my head and not do anything embarrassing like fall asleep and smack my head on the table, but remembering some of the conversations that took place over the time that we were there, looking at the way the mayor had kind of structured everything together, we learned some amazing things because, first of all, we were never in front of any large groups. It wasn't the kind of thing where we come in and we tell our story and we dictate the time or anything like that. But we were always with small groups, as Julia said, small groups of people. We'd go to a restaurant and a few of them would come in. Some of them I'm not sure if they were, you know, lured in and invited to be there and encouraged to be there or forced to be there or just happened by there. We're not sure how that all worked out, but there was always a group there. Our first dinner together, casual restaurant, and we're sitting around the tables and first of all, the thing that struck me from the faith side of things is just about we're ready to eat, and the mayor turns to me and says, "Well, now, Pastor, aren't we going to pray and have grace together?" Oh, sure, absolutely. You know, you never turn down that opportunity to pray. And that had already taken place a couple of times and a couple of other instances throughout the day, just because that's who they are. Faith is a part of their culture. And grace for dinner and some of the, we got together in one place and it was at the Southern Christian Leadership thing. After they showed us around all the rooms and places where all the parents would come and getting ready and everything, said, "How about if we do the Lord's Prayer together?" And we all kind of stood together and did the Lord's Prayer together, because that's who they are, not because they're trying to put on a show or anything like that, but that's who they are. So we're understanding more and more about these people. But that evening, as we gathered for that first dinner together, that on whatever that was, Monday night, and we're sitting around the table, and we're finally at that point where we're starting to say, I'm feeling comfortable with people who are of color. And they're feeling comfortable with people who are not of color. And as we sit around the table and we're getting started and we're sitting down at our end of the table, and the couple of the ladies from the Southern Christian Leadership Group come in, and they're getting ready for their big Santa Claus push for some of the kids and the young children and things like that, and put their brochure on the table. And somebody in our group, I intentionally raised the question, gee, that looks like a white Santa. Is Santa white? I thought, oh boy, you know, here we are. We're going to open up the conversation right there. And she looked at it real close. She said, no, that's a light-skinned Santa. But we're going to have a black Santa. And so that became part of that opening conversation that really began to loosen us up for that. And what a great experience that has been. One of the things I appreciated is, as I said, the small groups, whenever we're there, you know, after we have our dialogue time and answer the formal questions, there was always probably just as much conversation after the meeting that took place. A lot of one-on-one conversations. People were able to respond to questions that you raised or would ask questions about some of the things that were going on. That deliberative dialogue that we had that night. I had a lady come up to me and said, you know, Pastor, I understand the idea of forgiveness, but I don't understand what the Lord said when he said we have to forget it. And so we talked about that for a few minutes. And then throughout the rest of our time there, talking with a couple of the other pastors there, and we talked about that and why faith is important. And what we are looking at and what some of our pastors are looking at is how do we get to reconciliation? Ultimately, that's what we all want to do, is just be able to reconcile this whole thing, whether it's black and white, whether it's, you know, any other race that goes in there. And we figured it starts with forgiveness. We have to be able to forgive one another. We have to understand what that means because of our faith in God and what God calls us to do. Then we can move to that final act of reconciliation. It's not going to happen in an afternoon conference. It's not going to happen on a weekend retreat when we come together. It's going to take years and years of conversations, building relationships, building that trust with one another, having that time where you sit across the table and you joke whether Santa Claus is light-skinned or whether he's dark. It takes that time to just say, come into my world and see what I deal with, and come up and see what we have to deal with, and see what the differences are, and then we can work together on that. Ultimately, that's where we're headed. And we encourage people. We have a lot of folks that are looking at us and saying, you're doing something that's unique. You're doing something that really sounds like a lot of fun. We're doing something that's hard in some cases. And to hear some of these people, when some black people would say, I've never had a meaningful conversation with a white person. Just like we're saying, I've never really had a meaningful conversation about race with a black person until that time that we were there. And it really didn't happen until after we got to that point of saying, you know, we're friends. It doesn't matter your skin color. We don't even notice that anymore. But it's the friendship that we have. It's the relationships that we built. So we're looking forward to these folks that are coming up at the end of May. They promised when we were there. Well, one other thing around the table, that same table that we were there, and we're beginning to talk about, well, why is Maine so great, and what's Maine like? And the fear of them is, well, what about all the winter weather and things like that? And it looked like a bunch of proud grandparents pulling out their phones and showing people, this is my house in the winter. This is where I live in the winter. The stacks and piles of snow and things, and they're just going, oh, we're coming to Maine, but after the snow is gone. So they're coming at the end of May. We're looking forward to it. Lobster will be ready for them, and many other things. We're looking forward to conversations, a lot of time that we can just spend talking with one another and sharing where we are, where we're from, what we hope to gain from it, and where we can go from there. So I'll just quit rambling, and Ernie, I guess you're going to, I don't know what you got for us, but make something up.
I don't have a whole lot in the sense that I was a person.
Here, you got to be mic'd.
Okay.
It's a leash, so you don't wander too far.
Okay. Got it. I did not go to Tuskegee, and I kind of joined the group later after it got started. So I went to one of Karen's programs that the library was sponsoring, and I became interested that way. It's a little background. I'm a retired educator. I'm also a veteran, and in the Vietnam, I'm retired. So I have a little time. I think I have something in common with probably all who served in the military at some point, whether they be from Tuskegee or South Berwick or any other place. And as an educator, I certainly am interested in how our young people are looking at some of the issues that are on television 24/7. And one of the things that strikes me about what's happening in our culture today is that we have tremendous amount of information. We are inundated with information, but we don't stop to affirmation. And that to me is the key in terms of reaching new people, making new friends, understanding where other people are coming from, is when we actively listen. And active listening is about listening for feelings, not just information. Affirmation. My dad was a person I grew up in South Portland, Maine, and he was active in his community. And one of the things he taught me as a person is to be active in the community that you live in or grew up in. Give back to your community that raised you or helped raise you. And I think those are the values that I bring, in the sense that I love South Berwick, which I spent 40 years in. I came down as an administrator at Marshwood High School 42 years ago. And I'm retired now, but I think I have some things to give to the community, and one of the things is to join this group that will be welcoming representatives from Tuskegee in end of May. And I've taken on a small project of notifying a lot of our businesses in South Berwick about what's happening at the end of May. And we hope to have a roundtable with some of their delegation that they send about the idea of how can we improve downtown. South Berwick went through rough times in downtown and have revitalized a lot of that. So that's one little area that I am, and I think I have something to share. There's got to be some veterans in Tuskegee, and if they come to South Berwick, we'll have something to talk about. Because I experienced the culture of black, white, Latino, all were serving in Vietnam together. It was not a pretty war, as you know, but it was something that I guess there's no coincidences that I was involved, and I learned a lot about dealing with race, dealing with ethnicity, and I think I want to share a little bit of that as part of this program. So active listening, affirmation, some keywords in why I'm doing this, why I am involved, and maybe some of you are thinking that in your community or whatever your circles are, why do you get involved? And I think it's important to share a little bit about that. And I think hospitality, as we come to May, and the delegation from Tuskegee comes and visits us, hospitality begins with an attitude. And that attitude is, as they've described, the welcoming of the people who went to Tuskegee, that our job is not only to welcome them, not only to show them a good time, but to engage them and listen, actively listen, and affirm some of their thoughts and feelings. And to me, that's the key to making progress in combating so much information that we hear on television and newsprint and other sources, but we don't affirm each other. Once we get into that, I think things are going to be a lot better. So that's what it means to me, for me to be involved. And I look forward to, at some time in the near future, in the dead of winter, going down with my wife or other people to visit Tuskegee on my own and make some friends that we will make in May, and maybe I'll reconnect with them down there. So I'm very proud of our group and the leadership that's been involved, and as a volunteer, I look forward to being involved to the extent that I can.
No more.
Whoa!
I'm not done yet, guys.
Okay, I've been demiked.
No, this is maybe insignificant, but we never really, we tried to come up with a name for our group, and the sister city, Tuskegee, Alabama, South Berwick, Maine. Hold. Okay, thank you. You got me in trouble. Anyway, we call our group Common Ground, and I think I just wanted to make that clear, because when we started this group, we thought, well, yeah, there are differences. Obviously, if you're a black American, you've had different experiences than a white American, but we have so much in common as Americans, and we share a history, some of it good, some of it bad, and we really share that. And I think that I just wanted to get that common ground out there, because for me, that's the heart of what we're doing here. We're finding what we have in common and sharing that and appreciating that and enjoying that and recognizing the differences, and sometimes crying over them, sometimes laughing over them, but it's really about finding common ground, and I think that's a large part of what our group is about.
Just to finish up, one of the things we talked about when we first started this Sister City project was that, as far as we know, this is the only domestic sister city relationship that's ever been. Most of the sister cities are international programs. And we do hope that this is interesting enough to other towns that they would look around the country and find a sister city and do the same kind of exchange. We haven't gotten very far on our project yet. We have all these ideas in our heads of what we would like to see happen between our two communities, and these delegations going back and forth is just the very beginning of it. We want to see the school programs, and I want to have a musician exchange at the library for programs. And we haven't managed any of that yet, but we do see so many possibilities, and I must say that having this program and reaching out and taking the risks that we have taken have benefited us personally. All of us, I know, have been incredibly enriched by it. And I personally also have not found anything that's engaged me so much as an adult to learn the way this project has gotten me going on my own learning about Black America and listening. You all use that term. There's a lot of listening that happens when you're learning in this subject, and it's life-changing, I would say.
I mentioned the Facebook page, because hundreds of people exchange information on that. That's important.
Yes, one of the ways that we have been talking with each other in the interim is we have set up a South Berwick Tuskegee Facebook page, and people chat back and forth. We share the kind of Facebook things one shares, and it's not an ideal way to converse, but it's better than nothing, and I think that's where we are. Does anybody else have anything they want to say?
They keep saying that we haven't done a lot. I think we've done a lot. I have a list of some. How do we continue this? How do we grow with this? We have the Facebook page. I personally have a Facebook friend who I happened to meet when we were down there, and she sends me articles that I should be reading, and I do, and I send her articles and read them. We have a school exchange. Central School and the Great Works are exchanging letters, and they're doing book groups. we had a family that was taking a trip down south not too long ago, and they asked us, well, can they stop in Tuskegee? What's there? So we told them, and the mayor greeted them, and Colorful, his assistant, greeted them, and they had a wonderful visit. So it was just that one family went down and visited them, and they were very welcome. The architect in town, Mike Lasso, said, well, they have some beautiful buildings down there, so he's contacting an architect down there, and they are going to discuss buildings. I don't know what they do, but it's that connection that they're going to be making. Today, a student, a high school student, went down to Tuskegee University to see what this university is all about. And so it came up on Facebook. Her mother said, you know, who should we contact? Do you think it's good she should go? And so through Facebook and our information, she's now today, this next couple of days, down at Tuskegee University looking at it to go to college. Whether she does or not, I don't know. Amy Miller, one of our members, has connected with the Karen Hopkins, who is a reporter for one of the local papers down there. And Karen puts a lot of articles in the paper down there, and Amy writes articles for us up here. But they have joined together, and every 2 weeks they will write a blog together. And it will be published in the Fosters and down there in their local paper. We had a Skype seminar and 2 seminars at the library that we exchanged. Our technology wasn't so good for one of them, so we did a lot of listening. But the other one was a back and forth. So they had a conference going on down there. And so we were able, one of them was engaged empowerment and a town meeting. And so we could listen, and we made some comments. We would text back to them what some of our comments were, and they would share it with the group down there. So we've done that a couple times. We had the Tuskegee Airmen program at the high school, where Bob Shepard talked about his dad.
We have done a lot.
There are some senior, a woman in South Berwick said, is there a woman, an older woman down there that I can be a pen pal with? And so they got connected through Facebook and through Colorful and the mayor, and so they're now pen pals.
Second grade graders at Central School in South Berwick have instituted a pen pal exchange, and they've written, and the principal down there is getting the kids ready to respond, and that's to me very exciting.
So we have done some things.
The other thing that I think is unique is that we have decided to house the delegation that's coming to South Berwick in individual homes as a way of facilitating discussion and also getting to know about, you know, our home life, and you're going to have some interesting conversations that way. Sometimes in organized groups, you may not get that same kind of conversation. And the last thing I'll say that is always the hardest when you're doing work that is, as Karen has outlined and many of others, all the things we've done, is raising money. Raising money is always an issue. And just as an example, one of the things we want to do is to rent a van, so when they come in the end of May, that we can take a delegation and take them different places. It can be done other ways, but there's little things that would help. So if any of you know of sources that might be interested in helping us fund it, and it doesn't, you know, whatever amounts, would be certainly welcome.
There was a question over there.
I wanted to ask how the blog was coming between Amy and Karen. I subscribe to Foster's. I saw an article in there about that, but I haven't seen any actual.
It's
written.
twice a month, so probably in the next week or so
Yeah.
you'll see another installment.
I think they just completed one 2 days ago, so it'll probably be published soon.
Okay.
That'll be the second. Yeah. That's it.
Unless,
How many hours a week do you spend together as a group?
We have not regularly scheduled meetings. We probably once a month we get together as a group, but there's a lot of work that goes on besides our planning groups.
There's an oppressive number of emails.
But we all have like different roles and projects to do. The school people are doing a lot of stuff with the schools, and you know, everybody's got something going on, and it actually keep you pretty busy. But it's worth it. It's a great experience.
Ernie, Julia, Scott, and David, thank you for coming.
Very well. Thank you for having us.
We do have some refreshments. I hope you'll stay and talk to us one-on-one.